In this video, we're going to be looking at solenoid issues in an ABS module. We'll be working on a 2007 Saturn Vue. If you have a Saturn Vue, a Chevy Equinox or a Pontiac Torrent, it's going to be very similar. However, the principles you'll learn in this video will apply to pretty much any vehicle, year, make and model that has an ABS system. And that is pretty much any vehicle out there, any modern vehicle anyway. So stay tuned and learn something new. This video will focus on the replacement of this module, but we will also discuss some repair options on how you can repair this yourself or send it away so someone else can potentially repair it for you. This is a job I feel anybody can do. We just need to learn a little bit about solenoids and the ABS system, which we'll cover in this video. Therefore, I'll be adjusting my language accordingly so anybody can follow along and you'll save a lot of money in the process. Let's get going. So these are the codes we're going to be looking at today. This specific vehicle has a C0085, which points to the left rear ABS solenoid, and it's solenoid number 2. What is an ABS system? What is a solenoid? Well, stay tuned and find out, and let's look how to repair this problem. So looking at this ABS light here, you'll notice when you turn the vehicle on, the light doesn't really appear straight away. So I've just started the vehicle. You can see no ABS lights, no brake lights, absolutely nothing. But something you will notice is when the car goes over around 5 miles an hour, the ABS light illuminates. Watch this. There it is. As soon as it goes over 5 miles an hour, we get the beep of doom and the brake light. Lovely. So let's start from the top. You're probably watching this video because you see an ABS light. You may also have a brake light. And what that means is the ABS system is fully disabled on your car. So why not just the ABS light? Why this brake light as well? That's usually the light that comes on when I pull the parking brake. Well, the brake light on most vehicles is activated by a simple little circuit, only involving one or two things really. Usually the brake fluid level sensor, so when your brake fluid is low, and also, like I just said, the parking brake. They're pretty much the only two things that would make this brake light appear. However, in earlier ABS systems, or even, it really depends on the manufacturer of the vehicle, a problem with the ABS system would trigger both lights simultaneously. And the case with this Saturn Vue, this seems to be the case here. So you hear a lot of people saying, well, the car's fine when it's idling, it's not a problem. Going in reverse off my driveway, or even forwards off my driveway, it's no problem. It's just when I start actually driving down the street, I see the ABS light. So something must be, associated with driving the car. Well, this is a common misconception because what happens is, in this specific vehicle anyway, the car actually does an ABS self-check when the car exceeds 5 miles an hour. Just like the car checks pretty much every system in the car, even when you turn the key or when you start driving, these tests happen at different times. And for this vehicle, it happens when you exceed 5 miles an hour. Now, if you have a different make model of the vehicle, you would have to check the service manual, and it will tell you when it does the ABS self-check. Another thing I've noticed with this vehicle is if I stop and start the car 8 to 10 times in a row, say I'm doing errands, I'm stopping at different stores or whatnot, it won't do the self-check. After around the 8th, 9th, 10th time, it'll just stay off. There'll be no problem with the ABS system. I start the car the next day, it's back to normal again. So it's pretty weird, and that part isn't in the manual, but it's something specific to this vehicle. So the reason this happens is the wheel speed sensors, which you have on every wheel on the car. This is how the ABS system works, which we'll talk about. And when you start rolling the car very slowly, 1 mile an hour, these don't provide a very good signal. It's not very clear, so the ABS system can't really, translate this signal very well. It's not reliable. However, as the car gains more speed, the signal becomes more clear, and this is how the ABS system uses the readings from these sensors. And this is why I'm assuming the checks get done when the car is at a certain speed. So in this case, 5 miles an hour. So let's backtrack a little bit. What is ABS? So we're all on the same page here. Now, to understand what ABS is, let's understand what the acronym means. It stands for Anti-Lock Brake System, or Anti-Lock Braking System. So it's in the name. Basically, the wheels don't lock up when you need to perform an emergency stop. Say you're going along the freeway, everyone brakes in front of you, you're eating a sandwich, you don't really notice, you're like, oh crap, all the traffic stood still in front of me. Slam the brakes, and the idea is you don't skid and crash into the car in front of you. That's an example. That's really essentially the point of ABS. Now, a little further now, how does ABS work? Like, what really goes on here? So the ABS system is made up of many components in order to function. Each wheel, as I mentioned briefly before, has a set of speed sensors. So the computer inside the vehicle knows exactly what speed each wheel is turning. And it uses this as a main calculation to work out whether the car is skidding, for example. And if you want to learn how wheel speed sensors work and how to test them, I'll link a video in the description below so you can check that out. So let's just run through a quick example about the ABS system, how it works in, say when you're doing an emergency stop, for example. While the vehicle is braking, the ABS system notices, in this example, that one wheel is spinning slower than the other three wheels. It knows this because each wheel has a speed sensor attached, so the ABS system knows what each wheel's speed is. So if one is spinning slower, this is interpreted as the car skidding, for example. So when this happens, what happens is the ABS control module releases brake pressure on that wheel very briefly so that the tire can maintain grip with the road. And in modern systems, this can happen 15 times a second. So this is a lot faster than any human can do when they start pumping the brake pedal. Once the tire has maintained grip with the road, all wheels are spinning up at the same speed, then it reapplies the brakes on that wheel. And that's essentially, in a very quick example, how the ABS system works. Can the car be driven with an ABS light on? Well, cars never used to have ABS systems, 2 to 3 decades ago. It's more of a modern sort of invention, but at the same time, it's very important to safety. So what you would do if your ABS system's disabled, you decide to start driving it anyway, and you need to perform an emergency stop, you would kind of pump the brake pedal in order to try and prevent the car from skidding or, the wheels locking up. However, depending on the car, brakes could lock up under normal braking, and you may notice unusual behavior from the brakes, so do not hesitate to get this problem fixed as soon as possible. Now, why is the ABS light on? Well, we know it's on because the ABS system's disabled, but how do we know why it's on? What is the reason? Like, how did I know it was C0085 code? What is C? Explain it to me. Well, what happens is if there's a problem with many things in the vehicle, but let's just talk about the ABS system. If there's a problem detected in the ABS system, maybe one of the wheel speed sensors is dirty. It could be anything. The whole system will be taken offline and you don't have any use of ABS on your vehicle. And the reason the ABS system's taken offline is stored in the onboard computer. So we need something to pull these codes so we know what the problem is. And here's a few examples here, which we talked about earlier. However, this is just a small sample of problems that it could be. There's actually hundreds of codes associated, so we need a scan tool, and this will tell us what the problem is. Now, when talking about scan tools, you cannot just buy any scanner, because they don't pull ABS codes. And the thing is, ABS is quite unique to the year, make, and model of the vehicle. So you need a scan tool that works with the year, make, model of your exact vehicle. Now, I recommend a scanner. I'll link it in the description below. You can check it out. It works with hundreds of different cars, makes, models, and I'm sure it will work for your vehicle, but it's important to check that it is compatible, and that is something you do need to do when getting a scanner that will pull ABS codes. These scanners can go upwards of $100, so if this is a rare job for you, maybe take it to a mechanic, tip them $5, $10, depending how nice they are, and they can tell you what the codes are in the system. So here's a rundown of the specific code. If you want to know what yours means, you can just Google it. It'll tell you what the what the function is. Now these are chassis codes. They're kind of standard. It's nothing specific to GM. This is a GM vehicle here, and it just tells you what the issue is. It's saying there's a faulty left rear ABS solenoid 2, and it's either open or shorted. There's a poor electrical connection, or something like that. So this is why getting a diagnosis is important. You would just never know this without a scan tool. There's hundreds of codes. Just get it scanned, learn what the error is. We have a diagnosis. Let's go and fix it. Okay, so we know our error in our particular case is an ABS solenoid problem. Now, what is a solenoid? Where do solenoids live? Well, on this specific vehicle, these are the solenoids right here, these little silver cylinders, but they live inside this, which is what's called an EBCM, or electronic brake control module. This is off the Saturn Vue, and this is what it looks like. You may notice in other vehicles you may have more of these, but on this specific one we have 8. Now this EBCM here, it goes by various other names: ABS pump, ABS module, ABS pump control module. They're pretty much synonyms. They all kind of mean the same thing. And this thing attaches to the brake actuator. I'll show you a picture of that now. And the brake actuator has valves in, lots of valves, and they control the hydraulic sort of fluid, the brake fluid, to each wheel. So remember we talked about it can pulsate up to 15 times a second in newer vehicles to make the tires get grip on the road, and this is how it does this. So these solenoids here sit on the valves on the brake actuator, and it can pump them in and out, and that can restrict the brake fluid to the wheels, and that's sort of how it works. So we've mentioned briefly here, these are solenoids here. Let's talk about what a solenoid is. It sounds very confusing, doesn't it? Well, this is the ABS module, 8 solenoids, 2 for each wheel on this vehicle. Some vehicles maybe have 3 per wheel. Now, solenoids, what do they do? What does it mean? Solenoids convert electrical energy, so you can give it, say, 12 volts or something, and it turns it into mechanical work. Now, what is mechanical work? That's something that you actually kind of see visibly with your own eye. You can see it moving. So if we give this 12 volts, underneath there's 2 terminals. For example, we can connect this to a car battery, and you'll hear a click because it's actually doing mechanical work. So what do you mean mechanical work? So inside these solenoids there's a coil of wire, and in the housing here is a movable plunger, sometimes called an armature, but you don't really need to know that. Imagine a plunger. So when electrical current is introduced, a magnetic field forms around the coil which draws the plunger in. So in a nutshell, when 12 volts is applied to these solenoids here, they can suck on the spring-loaded valves, which are part of the brake actuator, and that's how it restricts or lets brake fluid flow to each wheel. Very simplistic view, that is how this works. And now when we looked at these codes at the start of the video, these are all the possible solenoid circuit malfunctions. You can see there's 8 right here. And now we understand what solenoids are and when they live. You can see 8 right here. So it's going to be quite easy to track down our problem solenoid with the help of a wiring diagram. So looking at the definition of our code here, there's 2 popular options of what could be the problem. The harness is opened or shorted, or there's a poor electrical connection. Now a common thing with these solenoids here and these EBCMs is that they're actually soldered in, and what happens is you can get a dry joint. A dry joint is where the solder just has a slight crack in it, and it gives it like an intermittent sort of function, and then it gradually gets worse, and then the solenoid cannot actually communicate with the EBCM, and it throws a solenoid sort of error, and that's what we sort of have today. However, that doesn't mean necessarily that that's the problem. It did mention there could be a poor electrical connection. So what that is, if you look over here, there's a really large wiring harness right here, and a few of these pins go to each wheeled speed sensor. So the question is, how do we know if we have a dry joint in our solenoid connection right here? And how do we know if it's something to do with the connection here? Well, you really don't. What you can rely on is either experience or talking to people who are very familiar with fixing these EBCMs. Now, in my experience, it's most of the time a dry joint in these solenoids. So what you could do is go to a scrapyard or pick apart and source one of these from pretty much the same exact vehicle in the year range anyway, and do a complete swap out. They don't need reprogramming. Alternately, what you can do is look at this harness here and do like a continuity test to the wheel speed sensor and make sure it's not shorted in any way. And to do that, we will need access to the wiring diagram. So what happens is one of these wires could be melted, it could have been pulled out, it could have been anything like that, and that wire is pointing to that specific wheel that we have a problem is. It was our left rear one. So the wire going to the left rear wheel speed sensor, it could be pulled out, there could be damage to it. We have to test the whole wire going to the speed sensor. That is a, totally valid problem, and that is perhaps something you should check and bear in mind. So if you don't have a full service manual available for your vehicle and you really can't locate one, circumstances are different. Maybe it's easier for you to source a replacement one of these from your local pick-a-part. But on my specific vehicle, this is a Saturn Vue 2007, we can see the pinouts here, and then we can cross-reference this with the wires right here. So the problem on this vehicle, I think it was 0085, it was the left rear. We can see here that pins 8 and 9 and the wires coming out of there are black and red. These are the circuit numbers. So what we can do is check the black and red wires to make sure there's continuity. And what continuity means is that you go over to the wheel and just make sure, like when you connect your multimeter, it beeps to make sure there's not a short, make sure the wire's not cut in half. Make sure the wheel speed sensor cable that goes all the way to this ABS module isn't cut, ripped, kinked, unplugged, anything like that. And if we go down here, we can look at the speed sensor for the left rear, and we can see again black and red. So it looks like the same color cables go all the way to that speed sensor. So that is how we would diagnose a wiring issue and make sure it's nothing to do with the wiring for this. So if we know it's not a wiring issue or a connection issue, or we don't really want to tackle that because we don't really know much about it, whatever the reason is, we have a few options with regards to replacing this EBCM. So the first thing we can do is take the EBCM out the car and ship it away to one of these guys on eBay. They charge various prices for fixing the issue with your EBCM. You just send it away to them. Some you pay return shipping, some you don't, and they'll just fix it for you, whatever the problem is. Then the problem's out of your hands. So the second thing you can do, which we're going to do in this video, is to replace the entire EBCM, so all of this right here, with your old one. Now, depending on your vehicle, make sure these do not need reprogramming. You should check your service manual for that. On this vehicle, the Saturn Vue 2004 to 2007, it does not need reprogramming. I've read that in the manual, that's a 100% guarantee. However, if you have a different vehicle, maybe it does need reprogramming, so that is something you do need to check. And when I say reprogramming, you'll need specialist equipment. If it's a GM car, you'll need GM equipment to reprogram this. You could take it to a dealership, they could do it for you. Or if you have access to the tools, you can do it yourself. So really quickly, while we're talking on the concept of model numbers and making sure it matches up and whatnot, I went to the local pick-a-part and picked up this EBCM. Nothing was really written in the service manual because replacing something like this, they have you replace the whole brake actuator, bleed the brakes and everything. So the point of this video is to just kind of replace the attached module, save a lot of time and money and go about it that way. So I couldn't actually see any reference to model numbers, and there's actually quite a few numbers on here, so it's a little confusing. So I picked this module up and I installed it in the vehicle, which you'll actually see in this video. However, the one that came out my vehicle, it actually says HAW. Even though the model numbers are different, I have two of these, the model numbers are different between them. I have two HAWs, the model numbers are different. However, what seems to be the case with this specific vehicle, obviously all vehicles are different, is that if it says HAW, replace it with another one that says HAW. If yours has HFW, replace it with a HFW. Otherwise you're going to get the light of doom, which I'll show you now. So this is why matching up model numbers and everything is very important for this job. So let's take the old one out and put in the new one. So for this job, it's just pretty much basic tools. I think the only thing you may or may not have is a T20. It's a Torx one right there, 6-point. So it's T20. But I do recommend getting a socket. They usually come with a set. You can buy them by themselves. And then you can just get it on a wrench and you'll have a much easier time getting the ABS module off. That's really the crux of it. Otherwise, just basic pliers for nipping out cables, wire brush for maybe cleaning up things like bolts and rusted things, standard flatheads, standard wrenches, a couple sockets, maybe U-joints, swivel joints and extensions for getting anything awkward, and a bungee cord just to tie things out of the way when they're trying to invade your workspace. So very basic tools. So the very first thing, make sure the key is in the off position, or just remove the keys completely. We can actually potentially damage the ABS system by leaving it in the on position. So on this vehicle, the ABS module lives down here under this fuse box. You can sort of see these brake lines going into the brake actuator there, which is that little metal block, and it's right under there. So we're going to have to remove a lot of these sort of electronic components. And whenever we touch electronics, we remove the negative terminal off the battery. So remove the negative terminal and make sure it doesn't contact this ever. You can wrap it in a towel, whatever you wish to do, as long as it doesn't touch that terminal there. So we're going to remove this ductwork right here. It's just a 10mm bolt here, a flat head right here, and a flat head here. You don't need to touch this one. So now it's loose, you don't need to take it off. We're just going to push it off the air box here, like that. Pull it out of its socket at the back, and that'll make it all loose like this. And then just pull up like this, so it's in the air, and pull out. So we have a lot more room to work on now. We can access it a bit more. The next thing we're going to do is move these cable harnesses out of the way. This is pretty much the only thing in our way now. And to do that, we're going to remove a lot of the fuse box. So let's take the lid off here, move it out of the way. And on top here, we can see 3 bolts right here. They're 7mm. Just undo them. They spin forever, so just make sure they're fully loose. And that's all 3 of them here. So once they're just spinning kind of forever, you know you've done one of them, you can move on to the next until all 3 are done. Seems we're messing around with a lot of the electrics here. You know, this pretty much taps into the entire system. That's the point of the fuse box. Just do not, make sure you don't short these out with a wrench or anything like that. If necessary, just cover one of the terminals with a towel as well. That's the last thing you want to do. So now these bolts are all loosened, we're just going to tap on them with a hammer. They're just slightly hung up underneath, so just get something like this and just tap on top with a hammer. You don't need much force at all. The point is we want to remove this whole fuse system here from the wire harnesses, which you'll see in a second. Okay, and the last thing to remove this top piece here, there's 4 little plastic tabs down here. I don't know if you can see them. Just get a flat head and just pry them all open. There's 2 here, and also 2 on the back here. 1 here, and 1 here. Once all 4 plastic tabs have been released, if it still won't come up, you just need to tap harder on these bolts here to free them up. See, this one's loose, but this one's still hung up. So we're just going to hit it again with a hammer. So once it's free, we're just going to lift it up very carefully like this, and just push it out of the way. The only thing we want to do is get access down here, so this can quite happily stay up here. So now what we're going to remove is remove these fuse blocks right here. There's 3 of them, and each one is attached to a wire harness here. So we can pretty much just pull up on them. You might need a flat head just to lever it out, but for the most part it will look something like this. You can see each major wiring harness there, is attached to each one of these fuse blocks, and that's how you tap into the fuse system. If you look under there, if you've ever been curious how the fuses tap into the electronics, well, they just go into these and then essentially into the wire harnesses. Very simple, isn't it? So once these are all pulled up, you can sort of push that one up there. You can push this one, the middle one, over here, and this one can just kind of come up and over here. And then what you'll see is something a little like this. Now we're slowly getting access to the ABS module. It's through all this mess of wires and harnesses and whatnot. So we're just going to slowly move things out of the way. Now, depending how big your hands, your tools, and your arms are, you may need to remove more things. So, for example, this I believe this is the transmission vent hose. We're just going to move this out of the way. I think what I'm going to do next, because I have quite chunky hands and arms, I'm going to probably remove this battery completely, just so we have a bit more room on this corner right here. It's just an 8mm if you have the original bolts on there. Quite simple. And to finally remove the battery, this is just the supporting block down here. It's just a little nut on the back there. It was hard to film while it was in, and then we can pull our battery out. Another thing you may want to do if you have quite big arms or big tools or anything like that is to just loosen this second clamp here, and we can slowly pull this off. This is just like a connector piece for the throttle body here. So we can just slowly move that off, and we can just kind of safely lift it out of the way, just right there, and that will give us a tiny bit more room. So now we just have a few kind of wires in our way before we can access the ABS module through here. What we can do here with this one right here, we can just press on this tab right there, and this pulls out, and then we can move this complete harness out of the way so we can get access. And that just pulls out right there, and you can just move it all to the side. So one last thing you can do if you still need more access, you can just pinch this right here for this tubing right here, and this can be moved and pulled out the way, and then we can finally access our ABS module, which is right there. So this is the orientation of the ABS module. You can see there's torque screws down this side, 3 of them, and also down this side. So you can use this as a guide to work out where they are when undoing them, because you'll be doing a lot of this blindly, as you kind of see through here. Right, now most people will be able to remove the Torx bolts from the ABS module from here. Again, a little fiddly, but if you have the right tools, perfectly enough access here. However, if your Torx screws there are all rusted like mine, you might need a drill in there, you just can't get your tools in there for whatever reason, then there is another option we can do to get even more access, and that is remove this whole frame right here. And the reason I didn't do that first is because pretty much everything we did we have to do anyway in order to remove this frame, so you might as well just remove as minimal as possible and see what you can get away with. To remove this whole frame, if you need to do that, there's 2 10mm nuts down here. There's 2 there underneath where the battery was, and coming on top of here where the strut goes into the mounting point right here, there is 1 10mm nut right there, and you'll need either a deep socket or a closed or open end wrench because the post there is quite tall. So with those nuts removed, down there and up here, 3 total, we can just pretty much grab on this whole frame here and just yank it upwards, just like that. So now this is all loose. Again, many options. You can manipulate it out of the way to get access to the Torx screws that you couldn't access on this side. Alternatively, you could unplug a lot of these harnesses here. You can see one's mounted onto the frame here. The positive terminal for the battery here snakes around here, and by just removing those 2, you can pretty much remove this from the vehicle entirely and get all the access you need. So it doesn't matter how big your tools are, whether you need a drill in there, this is plenty of access and all you'll ever need to access this ABS module. But now I've showed you every which way to access it, it's going to be easier to film and show you how to disconnect this. So what we're going to do now we can actually see in here properly so I can show you, is remove this main harness here, the main electrical harness. This is where all the wires go in. This is how it gets its power, how it talks to the wheel speed sensors on every wheel. So to do this, we're just going to get a flathead screwdriver right here. Just put it in this little curvy part right there. I'm just going to pry to the left. You can see it's slowly moving. If you have an old vehicle, you live in a dry climate, you do not want to snap this off, so be very careful with it and slowly pry it to the left. So this is how much it comes out, quite a long way, you can see here. Again, be careful with these plastic components, they probably haven't been touched in years depending how old the vehicle is. And once you pull that out, the harness can be removed upwards, and that's how we remove that from the ABS module. Just like that. So what we're going to do now is remove these Torx bolts right here. They're T20s. And they are 6-point T20s. Kind of like this. You can get these that attach to like a socket wrench, for example. Or you can use something like this, which might be very fiddly. And if this is all you have, you only have a T20 on one of these, a little tip, undo this bolt right here and take it out. That way this whole piece here isn't in the way of the ABS module when you try and undo the bolts. So when removing any rusty bolt, it doesn't matter what it is, clean it up with a wire brush before you even touch it. The last thing you want to do is strip something like this and have to drill it out. It's just a total nightmare. So clean it up, wire brush, make sure you have a really good fit on there, make sure there's no debris in there whatsoever, and then you can undo it safely. Now all the bolts have been removed. We're just going to get a small flathead screwdriver and just pry out the last cable harness, which lives underneath the ABS module right there. And with that removed, it's pretty much free to be pulled off the brake actuator, which is that silver block there. So if it's been on here a while, just go side to side really slowly and it should pop right off. So here's the old EBCM, the ABS module. There's nothing visibly wrong. That doesn't necessarily mean there's anything wrong, but visibly, you know, it all looks okay. But yeah, here's the old part. Now we're about to reassemble everything together with the new part. A little tip with these, anything torque or hex, I do recommend you replace them with new ones or better ones. If you want to fix them up, sure, I guess you can do that. Use a wire brush, really get out all the dirt and debris and just clean them up with something like gasoline or vinegar or something like that, just to get a lot of this corrosion off here. So what we want to do now is clean this mating surface for our ABS module. Use something like a plastic scraper or maybe really fine grit sandpaper, something like that. We just want to ensure we have a good mating surface when we put the new part back on. Similarly on the new part, there's a little rubber gasket going around here. Make sure it's all clear of debris and everything like that. This will be what's mating onto the brake actuator, which we just cleaned. So assembly is pretty much the same as disassembly. Now we're just going to put this new part back on, give it a little drive, and see if we can't get an ABS light popping up. So when putting these Torx bolts back on, go in a crisscross pattern. Anything with a large surface area, whether it's wheels or anything like that, always go crisscross. You don't want to risk flexing it or giving it an improper seal. These are 27-inch pounds. So we're almost back together now. When putting things back together, just make sure you go over everything. Watch the start of the video again and make sure all your connections are back where they were. Vent hoses, cables, pretty much everything, because you don't want to forget anything. It's really easy to do, especially when you start getting a bit overconfident. So we're going to get this fuse box in and take it for a drive. And a final note, the last thing you want to do is connect the battery in terms of electronics. So make sure all the fuse box is done, all the harnesses are connected, you're all done here, and then do the battery. We're all back together now. Let's take it for a drive.
What?
This is what you may see if you put in an EBCM with a slightly different model number. Even if, even though it's off the same range of vehicles, the same year range even, things like this can happen. It just cannot detect the EBCM. It's expecting the exact software, well, firmware version inside. and this is what you'll see. And when you pull the codes, it will say something like it can't communicate with the EBCM. So this is why matching up model numbers is very important. So as I mentioned earlier in the video, that's because I put in a HFW EBCM when it expects one of these. Silly me. So I'm going to save lots of time and replace it now. So I have a HAW one now installed. Let's retry it. Okay, so here's the moment of truth. So this is a good sign. It means the module's compatible because we don't have the spanner light right there. Now the full moment of truth is to drive over 5 miles an hour and see if the ABS light pops up. Okay, so here we go. We're trying it together. It's the first time I'm trying it. Let's go. Now that's good, isn't it? And the last option is you can attempt to repair this yourself, and what that entails is cracking this open, however, you know, it may be sealed closed. On this particular vehicle, it's actually a sealed unit. There's no real way in here. It's totally sealed. So that may involve getting like a Dremel tool, putting it into a drill and slowly cutting this open, and then once it's open you can reflow all the solder, and reflowing just means melt the solder and put some new one on there just to get rid of those dry joints and the cracks in there. So we're reflowing it, and that way our solenoids have a good connection. Again, it could be those joints, it could be something else inside, so it will be something you may need to inspect. So you get access to the board, get a magnifying glass on there and look for dry joints through the magnifying glass, and that's how you're going to identify a problem in terms of dry joints. And again, it is mostly that is mostly the problem, but it's not a guarantee. It could be something totally different. So you know, there is a bit of a time footprint on this, so you're going to put some time into this, and it might not necessarily, you know, fix it. However, if it does, then you will need to reseal this with some sort of gasket maker or something like that, because when you Dremel this open, or however you need to get this open, you need to make sure dirt and debris doesn't get back in here when you're done. So that's the third option you can do, and it's very helpful if you can't source a new one of these for whatever reason. Now let's have a little look inside here. You can see if we pop this one off, it's glued in. You can see a small circuit board here where these pins are sort of soldered onto these. So that's the board. Underneath, it's pure metal here, and underneath there's the underside of the solenoids in there, and you can see it's just a case of like a little bit of, you know, a loose connection in one of these could be the culprit. However, it could be anything on this board. You know, if you live in a hot environment, then, you know, easily one of these components can go. And yeah, it's covered with kind of goo. I think that's to kind of protect it and try and keep it cool. On the other side here, I popped that one off as well. You can see this just kind of routes the pins to the board. It's just like a routing mechanism, because the wire harness goes in here. Yeah, it kind of goes through and ultimately to the board and the solenoid. So something like this is, because the components are so small, you might be better off sending it away to someone with specialist equipment to help sort of diagnose this. Especially if they have something like a no fix, no fee thing, then, you know, you're kind of winning there. I just want to say a real quick message to our viewers. I made this channel a few years ago, and its primary aim was to give you the skills, but more importantly the confidence, in order to tackle pretty much any DIY job you may have. In the process, we've saved our viewers thousands of dollars or pounds or euros, whichever currency you want to use. I've put multiple hours of time into making videos each and every week, which I somehow juggle between family and a full-time job. If any of our videos on our channel helped you, please support our channel by clicking the thanks button underneath any video on this channel. You can choose how much you wish to donate. It's going to go right back into the channel towards videos, tools and everything else. So thank you very much for that. When you make a donation towards the channel, you can put an optional message, and your message will be highlighted along all the comments for everybody to see. The bigger the donation, the bigger the highlight, so everybody can see how awesome you are. So I hope this video helped you and you learned something new about ABS modules, EBCMs and all that stuff. Thank you for watching and take care.